Great. Okay, so I am Courtney Zinder. I'm an employer branding specialist in the Americas for RS. Thank you all so much for joining us today. I think together we can all come together and build a culture in a world where people can bring their true selves to work as far as their neurodiversity. So before we kick off, I wanted to read a poem by my niece. So my sister's here joining me. So she works in the field, and I'm just so proud of her. She was diagnosed with autism 2 years ago, and it's been a journey for us as a family. Sorry, I'm so proud of her. Sorry, my hands are shaking a little bit. Forgive me. I'm so proud of her being an advocate for herself and really being an inspiration for me and our family to make it a little better. So with that, I will read Everything is Different by a girl who has disabilities. And it's very sweet. She misspelled different, but then she crossed it out and wrote it correctly. She's 10 years old. So the earth is a strange place, as everything is so different in its own way. Every animal and planet are different, and that is why nothing is perfect. This poem is not perfect either. But sometimes the reason things are great is because they're not perfect. There is one thing about being different that is not so great, and it is bullying. Bullying hurts others and is unkind. Normally, extra different people are often bullied. Normally, people with disabilities or different uncommon skin colors are bullied. But did you know that those bullies are really mad at themselves because they're not different? The true meaning of this poem is that being different impacts people in many different ways, and being extra is not bad. She won an award for this, so I just want to tell her that I'm so proud of her. And with that, I will kick it off to our speaker today, Miss Taylor Heaton. She is the mom on the spectrum. So thank you for being here with us.
Of course. Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, Courtney, for having me. And I really am honored to come here and speak about neurodiversity. It sounds like this has kind of been a new experience for Courtney's family, getting to know this. It's been a new experience for me as well, in a sense, as a late diagnosed autistic mom. So I was diagnosed with autism about 3 years ago now. And so I'm excited to be here today to share my story and to talk about how we can incorporate an appreciation for neurodiversity in the workplace. So I'll tell you a little bit more about my story, but first I want to kick off with what we're going to be covering today. And the arrow is not working for me to switch to the next. Well, it worked right before this. Oh, there we go. Okay. So today I'm here to help us develop an updated understanding of neurodiversity and how it affects you. So even if you don't feel like you resonate with the term neurodivergent or neurodiversity, I promise you there's someone in your life who it does apply to. And so today we're going to learn about how we can support those individuals. I also want to help us debunk myths surrounding outdated stereotypes. Unfortunately, a lot of what we think we know about disability and different abilities has been from things that we've seen in the media that's just not true. So we're going to talk about some of those things today. We're also going to discuss skills that neurodivergent individuals bring to their work and how we actually are a tremendous asset to companies. And we're going to discover ways to implement neurodivergent practices in the workplace that benefit everybody. And then I just wanted to mention that there will be a Q&A at the end. So if you have a question during the presentation, just make a little note of it so that you can remember it at the end and we'll come back to it. Okay, so about me, I'm 34. I was diagnosed with autism at the age of 31. And I, after that, started a company called Mom on the Spectrum. And it's a YouTube channel, but I also teach classes online and I run one-on-one sessions. I really just educate others about how to create accommodations for themselves and others in their life. But the reason that I started that company is because this diagnosis changed everything for me. So I was a very successful student from a young age. I was at the top of all my classes. I was president of National Honor Society. I was homecoming queen. Like socially, I appeared to be really skilled. And so I never considered autism for myself because everything I knew about it said that that couldn't be, like I couldn't have this profile and be autistic. So I received a lot of different diagnoses over the course of my life. I spent a lot of time in therapy. I was, too stressed. I needed to calm down. I needed to, I was depressed. I was anxious. Maybe you're OCD, you're probably ADHD. And so I dealt with all these diagnoses, and sometimes it felt like it was a little bit of the story. But one day, one of my coworkers mentioned that their daughter had been diagnosed with autism. And I knew her. We went to school together. We were music majors together. And she was skilled socially. She was very smart. She communicated well. And I really felt like I resonated with her, the way that she did life. And so I thought, well, if she's autistic, maybe I don't quite understand what autism is. And her mom told me that one of the key things that tipped them off was her copy and paste behaviors. And so instinctively, I just kind of understood what that meant. I was like, so with copy and paste behaviors, that's kind of watching other people to figure out how they interact in a situation and then mirroring those same characteristics, patterns of speech, ways that you're talking, ways that you're moving. And in my head, I'm thinking, doesn't everybody do that? Like, doesn't everybody watch what everybody's doing and then like make mental notes and then do what they're doing in a social setting? And so that was kind of the light bulb moment for me when I was like, okay, maybe I need to learn more about what autism is. So that spun me into what we like to call the research phase. So there's many people, late diagnosed autistic people, once you kind of get this glimmer of, oh, maybe there's more to this. There's this research phase where you just exhaust the internet and you exhaust the library and you read all the books. And so I didn't tell anybody for like 6 months that I thought I was on the spectrum, because I'm like, people are going to laugh at me. This doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense. And so after I had done my research, I knew that I was on the spectrum. This felt like coming home to me. So I had had all of these different diagnoses, and they felt like, okay, maybe kind of helpful. But whenever I finally understood the breadth of autism and how it presents, especially in women, I finally, for the first time in my life, felt like I could stop searching for answers. I could stop, going from therapist to therapist, asking like, help me understand my brain, help me understand why I'm so different. So I had this feeling of coming home. I pursued a professional diagnosis, was professionally diagnosed in 2021. And ever since then, have just continued learning about it, and it's really changed my life. So that's what I'm here to share about today is part of the way it changed my life is that it gave me vocabulary to describe my experiences. And what I hope that I can drive home today is it's a lot of times it's small changes that we can make for ourselves and others that really make a world of difference. So even just having the words to describe sensory overwhelm, delayed processing, there's a lot more that we'll get into. It can really change your life. Having this vocabulary led me to feelings of validation, relief, and inner peace. And some people ask, is a late diagnosis worth it? You've been successful up to this point. Why do you need it? I mean, the inner peace, the self-compassion, that feeling of not having to strive anymore for understanding, like, why wouldn't you seek that out? So anybody that's considering a late diagnosis, absolutely, it's worth it. Now I know how to better accommodate myself through small changes, like I mentioned, that make a big difference. And I'm better able to create a life full of experiences that add value and depth to my life, and I can more easily recognize which opportunities to say no to. So that was a big thing for me. I'm a perfectionist. I love working so much. And so now kind of knowing my tendencies and how I burn out, I can say no to more things so that I can say yes to the things that really make me feel alive and that I can commit to with my whole heart. So the bottom line is that for me, greater self-compassion allows me to show up more fully as myself and to do my best work. So what is neurodiversity? Neurodiversity comes from combining the words neurological and diversity, and it refers to the differences among all people and how our brains work that cause us to experience and engage with the world around us in different ways. Neurodiversity also embodies the viewpoint that these differences in neurology and behavior are not deficits or deviations, that there's no single right way of thinking, behaving, or being. So this is a really important point to talk about today. A lot of people tend to think that if we can bring neurodivergent people up to a level to be able to function like the other people, that this is the goal. But when we do that, we're missing all of these very unique strengths and perspectives that neurodivergent people bring to the table. So with neurodiversity, we're acknowledging that brains are wired differently, and that by better understanding how different brains are wired, we can open the floodgates of what's possible with creativity and progress and moving forward. So I want to talk about the two models of disability, because I think this will kind of help us understand where we're coming from today. There's a medical model and there's the social model. And these are both kind of generalizations, but the medical model, generally speaking, is how medical providers approach disability or people with different abilities. This model supports the idea that one is disabled by their differences. We're going to talk about that in just a second. The social model of disability, which tends to be preferred by, again, this is a generalization, but many or most people in the disabled or differently abled communities. This supports the idea that one is disabled by their environment. So let's look at the chart, which will give us a better definition of this. So the medical model, someone needs to be fixed to fit in with society. The social model, society needs to change so that the differently abled person can fit in. Medical model, a deaf person can't go to the cinemas because they're deaf. Social model, the deaf person can't go to the cinema because they haven't provided captions. Then in the red box, the medical model would say that someone can't go to a cafe by themselves because they're blind. The social model would say that the cafe hasn't provided Braille or electronic menu options, and that's the reason why they can't go to the cafe. And then lastly on here, in the blue box, an individual might not be able to work because they can't go upstairs, but the social model would say that that's just because the building doesn't have a lift or a ramp. So neither one of these approaches is perfect, but for the purpose of our conversation today, we're going to mostly come at it from the social model of disability and the idea that when individuals are accommodated with changes in their environment, they can show up more fully in the world around them. So here's some examples of what neurodiversity looks like. It can present in so many different ways. We'll start at the top with autism spectrum disorder. And then we'll move clockwise. So dyslexia, probably most of you are familiar with that. Trauma is a really important thing to mention. So trauma is something that none of us have been able to escape, especially the past few years that we've all been through. And trauma can rewire the way that your brain processes information. And so it's really important to note that even if you don't resonate with the term neurodivergent, you might have similar tendencies because of things that we've been through. Next is developmental disabilities, cultural diversity, ODD, which is oppositional defiant disorder. This is often diagnosed in children. Specific learning disorders, ADHD, anxiety, depression, OCD, which is obsessive compulsive disorder, auditory processing, sensory integration disorder, being gifted. This is another thing for me. I was always labeled gifted in school. I've heard in other cultures they call it high potential. So sometimes gifted students often have neurodivergent traits, and they're missed because they just label them as gifted. They are higher intellect. Developmental coordination disorder, ADD, which is now just lumped in with ADHD, Tourette's, and Down syndrome. So let's talk about neurotypical versus neurodivergent. It's really difficult to define either term because I don't think anybody can point to someone on their team and be like, this is the definition of normal. I don't know that we have that. So not one person is going to exemplify what normal means. We all have variations that make us unique, and there's no one right way to be. So instead, we're going to think of neurodiversity as a spectrum, and many people are going to identify with certain neurodivergent traits and some more strongly than others. So you don't necessarily have to use a label like ADHD to identify with ADHD challenges. And we'll talk about that more in just a minute. But while learning about neurodiversity and how it applies to your life, make a note of the terms that resonate with you. And if a certain term allows you to better understand yourself or feel more self-compassion, then spend some time exploring this area. And you might be sitting there like the last slide that we looked at, one or two of those might have resonated with you. Like for me, when I started learning about autism, I just kind of had this extra energy around that term that I was like, oh, I'm interested in learning more. So just make a note if one of those things is sticking out to you, and that would be a good place to start doing some research. So here are some common neurodivergent characteristics. One is sensory differences. So if you'll remember when we defined the term neurodiversity, it deals with neurological, and neurological pertains to our nervous system. So our nervous system is our brain and our spinal cord. That's our central nervous system. And then the peripheral nervous system are the nerves that come off of the spine to the rest of the body. So sensory differences are very big in the neurodivergent community because we take in information through our nervous system in a different way. And a lot of times we can be hypo or hyper affected by the way that these come in. So we might, some people who are neurodivergent, they can't really tell when they're being hurt because their pain threshold is so high that they can't register when something is happening to them. Some people might be hyposensitive and they might be on the opposite side of the spectrum. So sensory differences are a really big thing when it comes to the neurodivergent community. Also, executive functioning challenges. This is really big with ADHD. So trouble with planning, executing, organizing. This also deals with regulating emotions. So some people, neurodivergent people, are going to have difficulty regulating their emotions. They might feel a lot of things at the same time, but be unable to talk about what those feelings are or why they're feeling that way. Next is the ability to hyper-focus on special interest. This is something in the autistic community, also particularly in the ADHD community. And if you know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about. You can go into a black hole of just productivity. And like, if anybody interrupts you, it immediately just triggers like this anger of like, oh, come on, this is all I want to do right now. And so that's one of the things we're going to talk about in the workplace that can actually be a tremendous strength where this huge bout of creativity can come in whenever we get to work on things that we really love. And then an intense experience of emotions. We talked a little bit about that. Not having the words to describe emotions is called alexithymia, if anybody is interested in learning more about that. And then you might feel like you can't understand your sexuality or gender expression without also understanding the way their brain works. There's a term that's being studied right now in research called neuroqueer, if you're interested in learning more about the connection between those. Lastly, on here, the approaches. We can approach things in unique ways or notice things that others don't. And that's another one of the kickers for me in realizing that I was on the spectrum is a lot of times autistic people will realize they'll take note of everything else in the room, but like the main focus. So like I'll be aware of all the details, all the sounds, anything that's out of place. So that can also be really helpful in a company whenever you're trying to plan and troubleshoot. Okay, and then some more common neurodivergent characteristics, needing lots of time alone to recharge. That is me, that's always been me. Rejection sensitive dysphoria. I want to talk about this one for a second. So I know that none of us like receiving negative criticism. Nobody likes that, but it particularly has a shutdown effect on some people in the neurodivergent community. And there really is an art to sharing this type of information with someone who might be on the spectrum or have neurodivergent tendencies. So if that sounds like something that resonates with you, there's a lot of research there and a lot of tips and tools for managing RSD. And that's especially helpful for employers to understand whenever they're giving feedback to people on their team. Next is the preference for routine, structure, and organization. That one's pretty self-explanatory. Observing how others interact and mimicking their behavior. That's that copy and paste phenomenon I was talking about earlier. Covert stims. So stimming is a repetitive movement of energy, and it helps regulate the nervous system. A lot of times, late diagnosed autistic people, they turn to covert stims because if someone doesn't know how to support you when you're younger, you know, like the stereotypical autistic stim is hand flapping, and that can be really upsetting to people who don't understand what it is. So a lot of times we go underground with the way that we stim and the way that we regulate our energy. So you might pick your nails all the time. You might blink excessively. You might pick your skin. A lot of people have told me that they scrunch their toes in their shoes because nobody can see them do that. And so covert stims are a really commonly experienced thing for especially late diagnosed autistic people. Oops, I hit it too early. And then delayed processing. So this is another big one for employers and like team leaders to understand. Sometimes you can have a conversation and the information in the conversation, you might have an initial response, but really for neurodivergent people, we need to take that information and sit with it by ourselves in a context where there's not social information coming in. We need to sit with that information, have our own space and time to process it, and then come back with our real thoughts. So oftentimes there's a much wider depth of information we're able to give once we've had time to ourselves to process new information. Okay, so ableism is an important term to discuss today. Many of you have probably heard of this term. I know for a while I had heard of it and I knew that I didn't want to be a part of it, but I didn't really know how to define it. So let's talk about it today because it's really important to understand. So ableism is the discrimination of and social prejudice against people with disabilities based on the belief that typical abilities are superior. At its heart, ableism is rooted in the assumption that disabled people require fixing and defines people by their disability. So this might remind you of the medical model of disability that we were talking about. Ableism, I know most of you are reading that and you're thinking, that's not me, I don't do that. But this can be so subtle. And I think it's really important to just become aware of the fact that we might have tendencies that play into this a little bit. And just if you recognize those things, it's just information, right? We don't have to have a judgment against ourselves for noticing that we might have some of these tendencies. Just make a note, make a change, and always stay curious about how you can come at something from a different angle. So some examples of ableism would be acting as if differently abled people need to be saved, right? Spending an excessive amount of time or energy trying to help other people who are different, making jokes about a person's differences, choosing an inaccessible building for a work event. This next one is important to me, glorifying disability as something heroic when a differently abled person makes any type of achievement. So to the outside world, it might look like, oh, that person in a wheelchair did something heroic because, you know, yada, yada. That's just another day in the life for the person in the wheelchair. And whenever we make a news headline about it, it's kind of, it's like condescending, right? That's their everyday life. They have to make different choices and different actions every day. And so really just striving to see everyone with different abilities as we're on the same level. Like we all have our own challenges that we face every day, and there's no need to glorify people with different abilities. And then saying that someone doesn't look that disabled or autistic, or questioning their use of accommodations. This one's hard for me because I received this one a lot, like when I came out as autistic. The way I describe it is a duck on a pond. So from the outside, the duck looks very serene and peaceful and calm, but under the surface, their legs are just going and going and going. So the amount of work that it takes me to do what I do every day, nobody else is ever going to understand what it looks like to do that. And so whenever somebody says, you don't look that autistic, that's really not a compliment. That's really an invalidation of all of the work that it takes to be me. And that goes for any type of neurodivergent condition. Next is asking invasive medical questions or questioning the validity of someone's diagnosis. Hopefully that's obvious. We shouldn't do that. And then appropriating terms like OCD when you don't have a diagnosis, or downplaying someone's personal challenges because you've experienced something similar. So many of you have probably heard someone say this, or you've been the one to say that. It's okay. Oh, I'm having an OCD moment, right? You're wanting everything like really clean and organized and structured. If you don't have OCD, that's kind of like making light of some tendencies that really have a very profound effect on another person's life. Like they can't just turn that switch on and off of feeling OCD. And I actually did it earlier. We were talking and some of the staff was talking about not wanting to talk about a conversation because it was like bringing up bad memories. And I said, oh, PTSD. And I'm just now catching myself. I'm like, that's not cool, because PTSD is a very intense, very challenging thing to work through. And so just like that, like sometimes we're going to say things, it's like, okay, there's a better way to do that. So just catching yourself when you use neurodivergent terms and making sure that you're using them correctly and with respect. Okay, so let's talk about some myths about neurodiversity. The myth here would be that neurodivergent individuals can't handle the same workload as their peers. The truth is that oftentimes neurodivergent individuals can hyperfocus and complete days worth of work in a few hours. So this is kind of what we were talking about earlier with the hyperfocus, the black hole productivity. I know for me, whenever I go into this mode, it's like I can create 2 weeks worth of content when I hit this stride, you know, and it's like very sometimes hard to access, but when I access it, man, watch out, because I'm gonna get a lot of stuff done. The next myth is that neurodivergent individuals can't communicate well. The truth is that we often can communicate very well many times and at very high levels, but many times this looks different than our peers. So written communication is usually very helpful for many, especially when this is paired with plenty of time to draft and edit. And again, in social isolation, like where people are not talking to you while you're doing this. It's also important to have different communication methods, electronic communication methods, because there's a lot of variably verbal individuals who need to communicate in non-traditional ways. The next myth is that we should create accommodations that help neurodivergent people operate more similarly to their peers. Like the goal is to get everybody at the same level. No, we're missing out on so much potential when we do this. The goal is to see each person as an individual and to really make sure that we're looking for ways to accommodate each person's specific needs. Because if we can identify different strengths and say, well, this person's operating differently than this person, instead of making them operate similarly, like let's find ways for both of them to excel. It just unlocks this new level of energy and creativity. And it's just really important to focus on more ways to accommodate that. The next myth is that neurodiversity negatively affects intelligence. And the truth is that oftentimes neurodivergent individuals are highly intelligent, and neurodivergency is not synonymous with less than. So I think this is especially important to talk about with variably verbal people, which just means that people communicate differently. I think a lot of times we can think, oh, they're not communicating, they're not saying things like, I need to feel sorry for them. They're not able to do what they need to do. What if they're communicating in their own ways and we're missing out on how they're communicating? Like, what if they're telling us things in other ways? How can we become more aware and more attuned to other people's communication styles? And then our last myth here, neurodivergent individuals are antisocial. This is so far from being true. And if you've ever gotten in a conversation like with an autistic person about their special interest, you're probably looking at your watch like, okay, I gotta go. It's been great. So actually we love talking. We love sharing information. We love learning. And oftentimes it's just because we don't know how to jump into a conversation. Like, honestly, I think neurotypical people, generally speaking, like y'all have really weird ways to communicate. Like y'all talk over each other all the time and y'all interrupt, and like there's never a clear cut space to like be polite and like enter the conversation. So just know that because we're not communicating with you, it doesn't mean we don't want to. Oftentimes it's because we're just trying to be respectful and like let people finish their sentences and like have time to finish the thought. There's some delayed processing that goes into it too, of like in a group setting, if there's a lot of ideas being shared, it's hard to like, once you have a thought to share, the conversation has moved in a new direction, and that can be difficult. But for me, like one-on-one conversation, I love one-on-one conversation. And so that's something important to remember too, in like team settings, that one-on-one can be more helpful for neurodivergent people. Okay, and here's how neurodiversity might present in the workplace: preference for one-on-one communication, preference for routine, structure, and clear expectations that are met with regular feedback. That regular feedback is really important. Easily overwhelmed with group work. So if you have like a group brainstorming session, that to me is like a literal nightmare. Like that's the worst thing that could happen to me. If I'm going to be asked to think of new ideas, I need a quiet, private space where I can do that. And then I can bring that information into the group and kind of workshop it once I've had my own space to put my thoughts together. Hyper aware of lights, sounds, smells, and other sensory input. Trouble receiving any form of criticism, which might result in feeling shut down and isolated. Again, this is related to the rejection sensitive dysphoria. Feeling like an outsider because of trouble with social engagement. I kind of talked about that one a little bit. Needing a safe personal space and regular zoning out breaks. So that's one way that our nervous system regulates, is just to zone out. And a lot of times after we receive a lot of information, we just need to be in a space where nothing is happening. Next on the list, trouble with time management, planning, and project deadlines. Difficulty with transitions. This is an important one. Transitions are very difficult for a lot of neurodivergent people. And it took me a long time to realize, like, when I go to the grocery store, I will kind of get stuck in the car. Like I'll park and I'll just have to stay in the car for a while. until something clicks and like it feels okay to go inside. And I don't know how to explain it other than that, but just being mindful that transitions are really hard for neurodivergent people, because it's like there's this, what's the word I'm looking for? You just kind of have to regulate into the next space and take in all the sights and sounds and smells and textures. And so it can be helpful to create kind of a padded transitional time if you're going to have back-to-back meetings or different requirements that you put on somebody. And then lastly, trouble adjusting to unexpected changes, especially in navigating emotions during these times. Some advantages of neurodiversity in the workplace, there are a lot, but number one, heightened creativity and unique problem-solving capabilities. So you're going to get some angles on things that other people just can't give. Because again, we're taking in information, not usually like the main thing, but all of the peripheral things that we're going to give you some interesting feedback. Next is periods of hyper-focus that allow for extended periods of high-quality work. Loyalty, honesty, and integrity. I would love to see this incorporated somehow almost in the diagnostic process for autistic people. I don't know what it is, but there's something about the community. There's this commitment to loyalty, always being honest, always telling the truth. And if you have autistic people on your team, they are going to be full of integrity and they're going to help you get the job done in an honest way. Next is attention to detail, maybe to an annoying degree. You might be like, that's enough. Impressive levels of expertise. That goes back to special interest. If somebody on your team loves coding, they're going to be the best that you've ever seen at coding. That's a generalization, but you're going to find high levels of expertise in the neurodivergent community. Tenacity and resilience, accepting of differences. This one's really important. This is great for team building. So I think because many neurodivergent people live their lives feeling like outsiders and not feeling like they know how to assimilate into the rest of the society, I think it tends to give us a lot of compassion for people who don't fit in. And so we tend to be very accepting of people who feel like outsiders, and that can be very helpful for team building. A sense of wonderment and a strong desire for new knowledge. I love learning. I lose sleep because I will think of something really, really random that is not anything related to my life, but I decide that I need to know all about it like right in that moment. I'm always wanting to learn to an annoying degree sometimes. Empathy, this is one I could have put on the myths. Like a lot of people think that autistic neurodivergent people lack empathy. I think it's probably the opposite. I think that we feel very, very strongly and just don't always have the words to communicate. And then lastly, unique perspectives can help get people and companies unstuck when they've been doing something one way for a long time. All right, and then I think this is one of our last sections here, neurodivergent workplace accommodations. Creating a culture where it's safe to ask for help and support and to share frustrations. So this is something that's going to be modeled by upper management first, where you see them model how to ask for help, how to seek support. And so you know that this is a safe type of conversation to start up with the people around you. Also providing regular check-in opportunities from upper management with plenty of feedback. Provide checklists, templates, and guidelines when possible. So if you can create any type of flow chart, hey, whenever we have a meeting, this is exactly what to expect. Or whenever you give a presentation, here's everything that we need to remember. Anytime you can create a flow chart or a visual guide to help someone know what to expect, that's incredibly helpful. Provide alternative nonverbal communication methods. There's a lot of research you can do. There's all types of different possibilities there. Reducing sensory overwhelm in your environment. Here's just a few suggestions. The number one suggestion is going to be to get rid of harsh lighting. So fluorescent lighting can be really upsetting. Lamps are always best, low lighting. Add plants, rugs, pillows, other comforting items that make things feel warmer. Create quiet spaces where that's just understood in this area of the building, in this room. This is a quiet space where you can just go for some solitude. Regularly clean all public spaces. That's pretty obvious, like including the refrigerator. But along with that, using less harsh cleaning chemicals. So if I worked in a place where really harsh cleaning chemicals were being used, I would have to consider not working there anymore. Harsh smells and even air fresheners, if you use those in a place where there's neurodivergent people, I am unable to hear what you're saying when those smells are strong. So it really affects my ability to communicate. And then lastly, on this slide, supporting the use of fidgets. And if you're lucky enough to be here in the office today, It's been so fun because there's like this table of fidgets here, and when all the adults come in grabbing them, it's like I'm watching them look like kids again. Like I'm really excited. So fidgets help with executive functioning. They help stem and regulate excess energy. Stemming is really important, and using fidgets is something, it's very helpful to normalize that and just make it not a big deal. All right, and then our second slide here, if you schedule a conversation or meeting, give a clear indication of its purpose. Okay, so the worst thing you can do is, hey, I need to talk to you at 2. That's not good. I really want to talk about the presentation you gave last week. I really wanted to ask more about the question this particular question that you raised. I really liked your perspective there and just wanted to learn more. As much clarity as you can give for the purpose of the meeting, that's very helpful. Because if there's just a meeting on the calendar, I don't know why this happens, but it's a phenomenon. Like that's the only thing that the neurodivergent person can think about the whole day. So thinking about the meeting, prepping for the meeting, the cognitive like gymnastics of thinking through the meeting, like that's going to take up so much of the processing energy that they have that you can really reduce that by being very clear about what to expect. Walk and talk meetings can be helpful. Go out, do something. Do an activity while you're discussing information, talk through transitions and build an extra processing time. We talked about that a little bit earlier. Offer mentorship opportunities, encourage regular breaks, especially outdoors. And if you work from home, this is important to do for yourself. There's something very regulating and balancing about just going outside, and that balances our nervous system in a lot of ways. So make sure that you take regular breaks when you're working at home too. Allow work from home and flexible hours whenever possible. Set clearly defined and measurable goals. Allow group members to brainstorm privately and then rejoin the group later. We talked about that. And then lastly here, this is something really important that I hope we can all walk away with today. Get comfortable with saying, I don't know, let's find a solution together. So come from a place of curiosity and listen to gain understanding of different experiences. So there's a saying that we say in the autistic community a lot. If you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. We all have different needs, different accommodations that would be helpful. And so it's really important to approach each person as an individual and to come from a place of curiosity, right? There's not going to be like one accommodation that we can put in place that's going to help every neurodivergent person. It's going to have to be a combination of things. And really it's an attitude of, how can I become more aware of this person's experience? How can I better support them? And it's a continuing and evolving process. It's not just like, here's some accommodations. Great, I feel good about this. It's let's revisit this conversation, keep asking questions, and come from a place of wanting to learn and being curious. Okay, what if you're sitting there and you're resonating with this? What if you're like, oh my gosh, like, what if I'm autistic? Yeah, it's a lot to think about. I just want to say there's no need to do anything right now. Like, just sit with it and see how it feels. Like, think about it. This is a lot of information to take in. It can be helpful to start reading about anything that piqued your interest today. Asking questions, like I said, come from a place of curiosity versus judgment. So not like, why do I always do that? Why do I always shut down when I receive negative feedback and like spiral? Just why is that happening? Like, what is happening within me that's causing me to react that way? And like, how can I better support myself? So coming from a place of kindness, start a conversation when you feel ready with someone that you trust, because it's really important to share these ideas. And that will also help you kind of put together your thought process on neurodivergent traits that you're recognizing in yourself. And then the staff here has encouraged everyone to contact their people team if you are interested in kind of talking about accommodations that might be helpful for you. And then lastly, consider taking the executive skills questionnaire at embraceautism.com. This isn't specifically an autism questionnaire, but it's on a trusted site that I really like. And this could give you some information going forward about whether or not you have neurodivergent traits that might be helpful to further explore. But the main thing is don't panic. Like, just ask questions, slowly kind of get to know new information, and just evaluate whether or not it feels good. Here's how you can find me. I do have a YouTube channel, Mom on the Spectrum. I teach a lot of classes to educate other people. You can find my classes on my website, momonthespectrum.life. I also have some free resources on there. And then I'm on social media on Instagram and TikTok at Taylor_Heaton_. And here's two of my resources that might be helpful to you. So first of all, the Big Autistic Resource Guide, which is accessible for all neurodivergent individuals. But my goal here is for this to be like the autistic phone book, and it features autistic products, services, evaluation providers, people who are supportive of neurodivergency in their practices and their medical practices. It's free to download. It's free to have your business featured, and you can download it momonthespectrum.life. And you can actually just do /resources if that's easier to remember, on the spectrum.life/resources. And then my Meltdown Survival Guide. This is a guide I put together to help describe more about how our nervous system is functioning, how it can often feel like one foot on the gas, one foot on the brake. And so I'm breaking down why that happens, what we can do to recover from one of those experiences, and some other products and resources that might be helpful for understanding those processes. And with that, I think we're at our Q&A. So if we have any questions that anybody would like to answer, I'd be happy to take a shot at it.
I've got a couple in the chat, so maybe I can start with one and then go. So the first one, do you feel that segregation, consolidating, and insulating the neurodivergent growing community could actually be promoting for the neurodivergent population?
That segregating the community could be promoting it?
Yeah, it goes on to say, I've witnessed that neurotypical people being excluded from ongoing conversations, much like I've seen those people treated the same way by neurotypicals. Shouldn't the focus be on inclusion and integration gradually instead of like?
Yeah, I think I'm trying to understand where we're coming from on that. I think for me, what I'm hearing, I think the conversation should be open to everyone. I think that, like I said, it's really, really hard to define what is neurodivergent and what is neurotypical. So to exclude anybody from the conversation, I think is losing an important perspective. I think as long as everyone's asking questions, being curious, if someone has an official diagnosis and clearly has experience and resonates with the neurodivergent community, let's let their voices come to the front, and let's let them have a big say in the conversation. But I don't really support the idea that there should be like two different segregated kind of places for people. I definitely think the goal is to integrate and for everyone to learn how to communicate together and learn from each other. So I hope that's kind of answering where the question is coming from.
Sure. Thank you for being here.
Oh, sure.
So when you talk about everyone is individual and everyone's different, if I think of social settings, family settings, or even workplace settings, and there's people that have different accommodations, how do you try and make sure within those settings and all the different accommodations that may be needed to make that be a seamless place for all?
Yeah, that's a good question. So can they pick up on the questions?
Okay, give a quick highlight.
So the question is basically if people like in different settings need different accommodations, how do you make it seamless so that everyone feels accommodated? Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah.
And I think the answer is it's going to be messy. I think the answer is you do your best. And like as a mom, both of my kids are neurodivergent. I can't always meet their needs. I can't always give them everything that they need. But I think, especially if it's a repeated group that you get used to being with, you kind of get used to the needs that are there. And I think, again, there's not a cookie cutter answer here, but just staying curious, like what worked, maybe assessing after the event, like what worked for us here, what would have been easier next time, like how can I make this easier? Communicating beforehand is really important. So if you're going to have people over at your house, like what can I do to, make you feel more comfortable? So yeah, I think that the bottom line is it's going to be messy. Stay curious, plan beforehand, take notes afterwards, and make changes.
I have one other question if I can keep adding to that.
All right, Megan.
So like you said earlier, like I'm learning, everyone's learning together in this space, somewhat more open than it has been before. What if you feel like you have offended someone? What, in your opinion, is the best way to fix that?
Okay, so the question is, what if you feel like you've offended someone? What's the best way to fix that? My answer is always going to be honesty. Like I would, and speaking for the autistic community, we value and praise bluntness. We love it. Like that feels very safe to me to just hear exactly what you're thinking with like no, premise at all. Just tell me what you're thinking. So if you're worried about it, I would say approach that person, be very specific. Hey, when I said this, like I was thinking about this with Larissa. Hey, Larissa, earlier when I made that comment about, PTSD, and I laughed that off about the stressful experience that you were kind of talking about. I can see how that made light of a really serious condition. PTSD is not something to joke about. And I'm sorry that I made that comment in your presence. Is there anything that you'd like me to know about how that affected you? So she doesn't have to tell me now in public, but I would just say, be specific about what you said and then ask questions. How did this affect you? Is there anything that I can know going forward that would better accommodate or support you?
And then we have a similar question online. How can I show neurodivergent individuals support without judging why they need support?
That's a good question. And they can hear you saying that.
Usually my voice doesn't have a problem being heard. Can y'all hear when I'm speaking?
I don't mind repeating it.
All right, we've got thumbs up. All right.
Okay, but now I need you to repeat it.
Sure. How can I show neurodivergent individuals support without judging why they need support?
I think do your own research and don't need to be rewarded for it. Just learn, study, grow, be curious. And I don't think it's anything that you have to bring to the other person's attention. It'll come up naturally. If you're in a relationship with someone or wanting to support someone at work, your knowledge is going to pay off and you're going to be in a situation eventually, oh, I read that this could be helpful. So yeah, again, I think do your own research, come from a place of curiosity, and just check in with the neurodivergent people in your life. How can I better support you? How can I be a better friend? Be my opinion there.
Love it. Check the room real quick.
I have a question.
Oh, that one.
I don't know if you want to go back to it, but on the ableism slide, might be back a little bit.
I'll find it.
I don't know exactly what it said, but I feel like there's a fine line between recognizing someone and their disability and then the part that you said about not making them like it's a heroic action or something like a big deal whenever they do something that is typical for a neurotypical person. So how do you go about honoring that they do have a difference, but not making a big deal out of it?
Yeah, so the question is, how do you honor that someone has a difference and needs different accommodations, but not make a big deal about it? Am I summarizing that okay?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like, I don't know, so glorifying that line. and
Yeah,
then-
she's asking about the fourth point on here, glorifying disability as something heroic when a differently abled person makes any type of achievement. I think for the most part, neurodivergent people, at least the people I work with, we don't necessarily, I'm the exception. I'm like, hello world, I'm autistic. Most of us don't really want to stand out like that. Most of us kind of want to go under the radar and not be recognized for having, I'm taking a lot of liberty speaking for a lot of people here. But I think, especially if you're in a company, if you're upper management, you're aware of accommodations that need to be made, making those as seamless as possible, having regular check-ins is what we're doing working. But I would say just don't comment on it. If become a safe place, by doing your own research, staying curious. And then if a neurodivergent person wants to have a conversation with you and kind of open it up, I would say that would be an opportunity to learn or make changes. I don't know. I'm not sure. Am I coming at this kind of?
Cause you want to recognize, right? Gosh, I can't remember if it was right there or not. The part where you said about all the work that it takes you to do something is a big deal, for somebody that doesn't have those same issues or whatnot. So how do you honor them, but at the same time, you're not making their typical, heroic?
Yeah. So the question is, how do you honor someone who's neurodivergent for doing something that is worthy of honor without making it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know what's coming to mind right now is just the same way you would another person. So just how would you make someone else feel appreciated for doing something that they did? It's usually not, I feel like showing your appreciation can take all different forms. And I just wouldn't, I don't know. There's so many different situations to think about here. But I think in general, just how would you show appreciation and honor to someone neurotypical who did something similar? I don't know, but I still feel like I'm not quite answering like what you're saying. Let me think about it. I'm having some delayed processing here because
okay.
it's a good question. And I'll come back to it if I think of a different
Okay,
angle for it.
thank you.
This person says that they think it makes sense to disclose to an employer that they're autistic, but they're worried about how to even start that conversation. Do you have any tips for opening up that conversation?
Yeah, a lot of people come and talk to me about this because a lot of people want to share and companies are all structured so differently. I'm going to take it from this company because I know you have a people team. I would say probably talk to them first, especially if you have, maybe first think of someone that you feel safe with in the company. And you could start a conversation with them first. Hey, I'm thinking about disclosing this. Is this something you could support me with? This is kind of how I'm thinking about doing it. And then making sure that you share it with the appropriate person in the office. There's some people who come to me and there's no one that they feel safe sharing with. And so this is tricky because a lot of times sharing a diagnosis can be invalidating if it's not shared with people who understand where you're coming from. So I would say, if you're able, share it with a safe person in a department where they can support accommodations and that type of information. If that's not available to you, share it with the closest thing to that and then use that information. Okay, so if it's not a good response, if it's something that's invalidating, if it's something that makes you feel unseen and unsupported, that has to be serious consideration that you take. And why are you still with this company? Why are you working here? And that's something, unfortunately, that I deal with a lot in talking with people one-on-one. That's something to consider. If you can't disclose your diagnosis without feeling invalidated and judged, then it might be time to consider finding a supportive environment.
And as a kind of looking at it from a different but similar perspective, how do you deal with family members who aren't taking you seriously and are potentially invalidating your struggles that you're having?
How do you deal with it when family members are being invalidating? Again, this is one of the most common things that people come to me for support with. It's very common. And especially some people just don't really have a grid for mental health. And some people think that that can be a sign of weakness to pursue more information and support there. So for me, I have to remind myself and I remind the people that I work with and mentor, no one can live a day in your life. No one knows what it takes to be you. And you have to validate yourself. You have to, for me, I frequently reflect back on, how much value it's added to my life to know that I'm part of the autistic community. And then I have slowly, it's been slower than I've wanted to, but I've slowly found people who can support me in the ways that I want to be supported in. For many people, that often doesn't come from their family and friends. And that's very hard because we want the people closest to us to support us. I'm just going to say that doesn't always happen. And if you can start a conversation, hey, when you said this, it really affected me in this way. And it would really make me feel more supported if you could, read this book or something. If it's a safe conversation, then that conversation can continue and you can grow together. But if it's met with further invalidation, if there's not a desire on the other end to learn and to grow, then you're just going to waste your energy. And as hard as I know that is to swallow, the longer you spend trying to change somebody who doesn't want to change, the more it's going to negatively affect you. So there are people out there who are going to support you and validate you. It might be in a different place than you think. So that's my answer to that one.
Thank you so much. And I think we have 5 minutes left, so I think that'll be our last question as we go ahead and wrap it up here. I do just want to mention you are getting a lot of praise and kudos and appreciation in the chat as well. People are loving what you have shared today, so thank you.
Yeah. So thank you for everybody who's joining us in the room today and who joined us virtually. Again, this is RS in the Americas, so please go follow our LinkedIn channel. We're looking to open up more opportunities like this for people outside of our company. Or if you're interested, check out our careers page. We love new people apply. With that being said, thank you so much, Taylor, for being here. And I hope you had some great takeaways. We did have a lot of comments about people wanting the recording of this session. We won't be able to release it externally to people, but please check out Taylor's channel. And thank you again so much. And we appreciate you making the world a better place with us.
Can you go back to the last slide where we can find her on?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and we'll jump back to the last slide before we close out the session. And thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you for
Yeah.
having me.
Thank you all.